Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Stay friends. We have another exciting guest on this podcast like we always do. His name is Scott Morgan, and he's running an interesting organization in Kansas. He's going to tell us more about that organization and what it does and what he's been doing. So welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm excited to be here.
We're glad to have you, and if you could kindly get started by giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Oh, sure. I'm a fifth-generation Kansan. Went to school here. After law school, went out to Washington, D.C., and worked for two U.S. senators from Kansas, one Senator Nancy Landon Kassebaum, and then Senator Bob Dole. And when he was majority leader, he appointed me as representative to the Federal Election Commission as a non-voting member, a position that has since been declared unconstitutional. And then I served as chief counsel for his 1988 presidential campaign. And then my wife and I were expecting our first child, and so we decided to move back to Kansas. And I worked for the Republican governor there as chief counsel for him, and then went into private practice. And then my wife and I ended up starting and building our own small statistical publishing business that we ended up selling about 20 years later to Congressional Quarterly. And I focused on things here in Lawrence, Kansas, like being on the school board and being very involved with a lot of different activities. So that's my exciting life.
Yes, that is exciting.
And we had three children. We have three children, and we took them to all 50 states, 48 in a minivan. And I say that because we were very proud we survived that. But it was good for our kids.
Yeah. Yeah, so you did a lot of road trips then.
Well, a lot of road trips. We had about 12 years of just running your own business is scary, but it also gives you some flexibility. And so we would go out camping, and being in Kansas in the middle of the country, you are somewhat close to the whole place. And so we just would plan them and head out and tell the kids it was good for their character.
Yes. Yeah. So I trust you didn't have too many family fights with all that driving.
Oh, we did. That's the joy. We call it we have different types of fun, but that's the kind where it isn't fun when it happens, the car breaks down or there's a rainstorm or whatever, but it's always pretty funny later. And so we have a lot of very good memories that at the time weren't all that enjoyable, but they became really fun.
Oh, sure, in retrospect. Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned you work for Bob Dole. I've been thinking lately how that I was thinking about him, interestingly enough, because I was thinking that he's a different type of Republican than I trust you'll agree with me than people running the country right now.
To put it mildly, both he and the other senator I mentioned, Senator Kassebaum, who was Alf Landon's daughter, actually, she was the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate in her own right, not following her husband. And that was a very interesting experience. When I went out to work for her, she was the only woman in the Senate. They were having to change things like the gym and the restrooms and the cloakroom. She was perfect for it. She was a very moderate Republican. Kansas has a long history of having it did anyway, of having moderate Republicans. And Bob Dole was actually considered one of the conservative Republicans, but by today's standards, he wouldn't pass muster for that title anymore. So both of them were great to work for. I really respected them. Dole was an intense job to work for him, and it was really good for me. But yeah, it was a very different time in a lot of ways. Like watching him work on the floor. He actually had a radio show back then, didn't have podcasts, with Ted Kennedy. It was just one of the syndicated news services did a back and forth between Ted Kennedy and Bob Dole. And they were on, I guess, Judiciary Committee together and some others. And they would really go at it, but they really enjoyed each other, and they were friends. And he did that with George McGovern, who some people might remember was the 72 Democratic nominee for president. there was just a lot more personal relationships, and so even though they would get into heated arguments and disagree on policy, they could work together on things like resolving, at that time, Social Security, extending the Voting Rights Act, just a lot of things where they could work with the other side to get meaningful things done for the problems that were facing the country. But that doesn't seem to be the way things work now.
Yes. Interestingly, I was thinking back when Bush was running, I've been supporting alternative parties for the whole time. So my whole voting career has been supporting alternative parties. So one of my then friends, we didn't have any fight or anything. It's just time fades away. She was an online friend, and she was saying, this is not the time to vote for alternative parties. And since people always say that every election, I said, when is the time? And she said, when Bob Dole was running against Bill Clinton, that would have been a good time to support alternative parties because Bob Dole was a moderate Republican. So, like, she thought George Bush was so terrible you had to vote against him rather than for somebody else. Yet she thought Bob Dole was somebody that you didn't have to worry about because he wouldn't ruin the country like Bush would.
And you're talking about Bush the second, George W. Bush.
Yeah, Bush the second. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, well, that's an interesting take on it. Yeah. No, it was the policy differences were real, but not existential, and you could be comfortable with either one of them, knowing that the country was going to work. And the other thing was that Congress was a functioning entity at the time, and would have been what it was intended to be, which is another check and another balance to any one man doing something.
Yes. Yep. And the historians, as Democrats go, they considered Clinton, although people like Rush Limbaugh would say he's ultra liberal, he was a fairly conservative Democrat.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah. No, he was part of that whole new third way kind of blue dog Democrat trying to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's right. What we're saying about him and Dole, because they both weren't terribly extreme. So it was an election where you didn't have to worry about the fate of the world so much.
Yeah, no, you didn't. They were both very pragmatic as well. I mean, they were both egotistical politicians. You can't be at that level and not be, but they both were pragmatic and had a deep appreciation and affection for the country and the Constitution, and it just was a different approach than what some of what we're seeing now.
Definitely. So what's the organization you're with? Can you please tell our audience about that?
We are trying to start a new party called the Free State Party. For those who aren't familiar with their Kansas history, Free State was we were part of the Bleeding Kansas during the prelude to the Civil War.
Yes. And
because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, whether we came in as a slave state or as a free state was to be determined by a vote of the population living in the territory at the time of statehood. And there were a lot of Missourians coming over and trying to change things. And the first party created in Kansas was the Free State Party. It was a forerunner, one of many forerunners to the Republican Party, because neither the Whigs nor the Democrats, the two primary parties at that time, were addressing slavery to a lot of people's satisfaction. And so they started a local party, the Free State Party, and then eventually it melded into the Republican Party. So that's where we got the name. But we are a party for the moderate voice, for the moderate center. A lot of, as I think I mentioned earlier, there's been a long-standing tradition in Kansas of moderate Republicans. For a long time, people sort of viewed it as three parties out here. You had the Democrats, you had the moderate Republicans, and you had conservative Republicans.
Oh.
But the conservative and the moderates were all Republican, and they would fight it out in the primary. But in the legislature, then, you had three different really groups that you were trying to reach to get anything passed. And so different groups would work with different groups at different times. In the last 20 years, the part that I was part of, I was Republican nominee for Congress in the 90s, that part has just been run out of the party. We just lost. And, the whole rhino thing, and it got more and more conservatives, and I blame it all on the primaries, but that's what happened. And so some went to the Democratic Party, which in Kansas is pretty moderate, but others of us are still not happy with either one of the parties. So we've been involved along kind of like last 10 years working on trying to come up with how do moderates in Kansas have their voice at the political table.
Okay.
And we think things now have gotten so strange that and what we are finding is there is a lot more positive reception to the concept. Because like your friend said, well, as you know, as someone who studied alternative parties, third parties, to use the more common term, but obviously not a third party. But it's, they never work. It's just the assumed wisdom. And to some extent that's true, but we have a whole approach to why now is different and why a third party can work. And so that is what we are working on.
Okay, wow. A lot of stuff to unpack there. That's good. So why is now the time that it's a good time to have your party?
I would have thought, I think 10 years ago would have been a good time for the party, but it becomes, the reason we need it is because, and like I mentioned, that I blame primaries. There's a lot of causes, but in Kansas at least, it's the primary, because so few people vote in the primary. We have our primaries in August, which is not the most delightful time, usually. It is now, but usually in Kansas. And our turnout is so low. In the last primary in 2024, 17% of registered voters voted in the primary. For one thing, we have closed primaries. You have to be a Republican or a Democrat to vote in their primary. And our second largest group of registered voters out here are unaffiliated. So they can't vote. So you only had 17%. 13% of them were in the Republican. And they determine who largely get into office, are that small, very ideologically driven group of people who turn out in primaries. And moderates just can't break through it because moderates tend to be people with lives to live. They're not zealots by definition. They are busy. They are raising kids, running businesses, and they don't turn up in August. They should, and occasionally they have, but more often than not, they don't. And so you now have this thing in Kansas. There's 125 members of our state house, and in the 24 election, 40% of the seats were unopposed. 2 years before that, 50% of the seats were unopposed in the general election because everything was decided at the primary. And so when people say, well, you're a spoiler, we just laugh and say, well, how are we spoiling? We're focusing on seats where one or the party or the other, typically the Democrats, aren't challenging the Republican because their national brand is such poison out here. And so we are trying to fill a space that has customers. It's like in a market selling a product. There are customers for what we are offering. And so that's why we think a third party has an alternative party has a much better chance. And so far, the reaction has been very good.
Oh, great. And some of our other guests have mentioned they've seen external polling, and one organization we mentioned, they do their own polling, and they found out that now more than ever, people are identifying as independent. So that would, assuming that holds true in Kansas as well as the rest of the nation, that would seem to also be a factor to support the party.
Wait, it is, and it is the fastest growing. There are still more registered Republicans than unaffiliated, but there are more affiliated than Democrats, and it's the fastest growing section. Now, being unaffiliated, which is what we call independent out here, doesn't mean you're moderate. You could find that neither party is far enough left for you or far enough right for you. I mean, that doesn't tell you where they stand, but it does tell you they're not happy with the two offerings that they have. They're not
sure.
willing to commit to them. So yeah, no, I think that's growing across the country, and it's certainly growing in Kansas.
Okay, I get
People,
you.
and they are looking for a product.
Okay. Okay, so is your strategy, because some of these voters some of them are definitely not moderate, so are you not wanting to get the independents who are not moderate, only the moderate independents, and then take out the moderates from the other parties?
We're taking anybody who wants us, but the targeting. One of the basic things we are doing. I was part of a group in 2016 and 17 that tried to. Or do you hear sirens?
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah, unfortunately, we're right by we're by station, so yeah, there's
okay. No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't over here. But we tried to start a party of the center, not the cleverest name, but anyway, that's what we were doing. But we did not create a platform. We just were for good governance. We were for the Constitution. We were for, working things out, finding solutions. And that sounds great, but people still want to know, well, where are you on? And then there will be a list of issues that they want to know. Where are you on abortion? Where are you on taxes? Where are you on guns? Where are you on whatever it is that people comes to mind? And one of the things that we are doing differently this time is that we have defined what we mean by moderation, and we call it principled moderation, and we call it moderation with a backbone, because we have principled moderation is our ideology. Moderates don't usually think of themselves as being ideological, but this is both a governing and a values-based. And what you find with a lot of national groups in particular that are trying to do similar things is they are for the things we were for in the party of the center, but they don't get into the specific issues. They're for Democrats, they're Republicans, independents, they're for everybody. And that is legitimate, and I get it. But we find to create a party, we have to stand for something, or else people think you don't stand for anything, and they've got an argument. And so that governing part of our ideology is actually shared by good conservatives and good liberals who believe that in the rule of law, in the Constitution, they just have different values that they would prioritize than what we would have. But where we split, we find our biggest difference is in our values ideology, which is still pretty broad. There's a lot of room for, Kansas, I think people view it as a monolith, but Western Kansas or rural Kansas is very different than the fastest growing areas, which are suburban Kansas City, Wichita, communities like Lawrence and Topeka. The larger groups, there's a lot of difference there between urban, suburban, and rural.
Sure.
And so there's still breadth within our principles, but it still has guardrails. We take a stand on abortion. We take a stand on guns. We take a stand on education, public and higher education, on affordable housing, on Medicaid expansion, which is still an issue in Kansas. There are other local issues that we take a stand on, still within broad areas, but it doesn't allow you. We are trying to defend between the further left and right wings. In the Republican Party, the furthest right wing has taken over the party, and in the Democratic side, in our view, it hasn't taken over, certainly not in Kansas, but it is such a part of the national brand that it makes it untenable in a lot of communities within Kansas.
Oh, okay. So how do you come up with your positions? What is the process? How do you decide what is a moderate position?
Well, there's this group that has been working on it, and on trying to find, because Kansas has this history and tradition of moderate Republicans. There's a lot of us out there, former moderate Republicans, and we now have, which has helped a lot. moderate Democrats who have given up on their party ever doing anything in Kansas, and also just not happy with its national party and its inability to relate to people in places like Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have both now moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans in addition to unaffiliated. And we are self-appointed, but we are the group that has worked on this together to try to fight this out and try to see what is it that would appeal to what we view as a significant percent of the population. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. But so far we're finding people like it because, yeah, okay, I'm with you on this. I don't agree with everything, but I like that you're being honest about it. And I like that I know what you are. And I also like I know what you're not. And that those kinds of things help the average voter decide whether or not they want to support you.
So can you define moderate as what the majority supports?
Well, I don't know if it's the majority. I really don't.
Okay.
It's a significant part. I think most Americans, and certainly most Kansans, are moderate. Well, a lot of them view themselves as moderate, but they may have a single issue that they can't split with you on. And typically, if you're single issue, you don't meet our definition of moderate. You've got to be willing to accept that you're not going to agree with every candidate on every position, but that you know the founding principles. And we think that that's, I don't know, 40% of Kansans would fall into that category on any given year.
Okay.
Some people may remember that in 2022, right after Roe v. Wade was overturned on abortion, they picked Kansas as one of the first states to have it put into the Constitution that it was banned, and that they just went after it. And they did it in a primary. They held the constitutional amendment vote during the primary when they know most people don't vote. And in 2022, we stunned actually ourselves, but certainly the country, when over 58% of the voters and throughout the state voted that down because it was just too extreme what they were trying to do. They overplayed their hand. And I think that reflects the nature of Kansans. We're very much you live your life, I'll live my life, and let's just help each other when we need to, and let's do some things together that we can't do separately. But there is a respect for letting people just live their own life. And that group at one day or another, they fall within the moderate category because they recognize other people have different views and different perspectives and different values. And that's okay because we can all live together and work together. We don't have to be just real extreme and say you have no value and push you off to the side.
Okay. So you say it's a committee that's working on the platform issues?
Well, that's who you had asked who drafted it. That was who drafted it. Now it's part of our party, and so it's it's there. And I mean, we have hundreds of people that are working on one part of this or another, and you have your leadership and it's just we have to get 20,000 signatures to get on the ballot in Kansas. And so there's a lot of legwork going on and a lot of just a lot of details. It's a very much a grassroots, ground up approach, which is also something we're very big on. Too often I think people think the solution to today, what ails us today across the country is we need to find the savior at top to run for president. Excuse me. And we think it's got to be reversed. We've got to start at the bottom. You work with seats that you can win, and you focus on the state house, whether state rep or state senate, and you build it up because that's how you build support. People start believing, oh, they can win. You no longer have that third party stigma, and you can have a ripple effect that grows pretty quickly into something that can change it even at the national level. But that's why we're starting down here at the bottom and working with just, these aren't professional candidate, politicians. These are just the kind of people you find in all communities that do school board, active in their church, active in their community, in business. They're the kind that volunteer for things. They're the doers in a community, and they're just tired of this lack of doing and just the constant yelling across at each other and getting more and more strange as far as disregarding norms and the Constitution and the rule of law.
Sure. So what's your outreach strategy to attract people? So how are you going to get these moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats to come to your side to know about your party?
It is, we are starting a large-scale social media ad campaign. We have been mostly working at the initial place of starting this, what we call action committees in all the different communities that we can find people. Sometimes they're just 2 people. These are small towns. Sometimes it's more. It is very word of mouth. It is a different campaign than when we will be running people for office. This is very much have you heard about these folks? We have our website, joinfreestate.org, and it's just word of mouth, social media ad campaigns. We have been fortunate that some money has come in from people who are saying, just finally, it's about time. And in Kansas, you're not talking about 20 million people. You've got not quite 3 million people spread throughout a very large state, and you just need to be able to reach them in the way that you're not going to be doing television or anything. You've got to just work on earned media and setting up these smaller groups within each community that can then grow by 10, by 20. And that's our plan, and so far it's working.
Oh, wow. Sounds good. Scott, we thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about your party. It sounds like you got a good thing going. You got a good philosophy. You got a good background. So it sounds like your party is in a position to excel.
I'm excited about it because we're focusing, and we have our plan up on our website, but we're focusing initially on 5 House seats because they are affordable, they're doable. And in Kansas, both the Senate and the House are controlled by supermajorities of the Republican Party. They can override any governor's veto. It doesn't matter. They control everything. You lose 5 votes in the House and they've lost their supermajority. So that's doable.
Oh, wow.
But as we get going, and initially we're already kind of sensing, if the field opens up to other races, including national, U.S. Senate or Congress races, we'll compete in those races. And I think even taking the supermajority away from Kansas House, which stunned the country in a way. Well, wait a minute. Kansas is just a red state out there. It's just Republican. How are they losing seats to this know-nothing, party? And I think the ripple effect, I think the entire country is ripe for this. And that's why we get excited. But our focus is on what we know we can do. Our little heads can wrap around. And so that's what we're starting. But I know people are trying these things all across the country. And just like the original Free State Party ended up, uniting with similar parties in other states to form the Republican Party, I think this is how change will happen in this country, is if groups similar, not exactly like us, across the country, work in their states and start building things up, and then we find common ground and move forward.
Sounds good. So, Scott, how can our audience support you and your party?
Go to our website, joinfreestate.org, and you will see that there are ways to sign up. You obviously can donate, but mostly it's just show support, show interest. If you happen to be in Kansas or know a Kansan, they're not all bad. Let them know about it, and that it's anything they can do would be helpful.
Great, Scott.
Okay.
Thank you for going on the podcast today.
No.
We appreciate hearing about what you said. We like what you said, so we appreciate that.
Thank you, Andrew. I enjoyed it.
All right. Have a great day and all the best to you and everything you do.
Thank you. You too. Bye.